Welcome back and thank you for staying tuned. You're watching Global Digest on ADBN. In January 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House for a second term. He ushered in a new wave of controversial policies that were already reshaping global relations. From aggressive tariff hikes, which have disrupted traditional trade alliances, to sweeping rollbacks on gender rights protections. The US's stance has not only intensified diplomatic tensions, but also encouraged a notable shift in how other countries are framing their own domestic and foreign policies. African nations, historically intertwined with US trade framework like AGOA and dependent on the soft power of international human rights norms, now find themselves at a crossroad. As trade routes realign and cultural policies shift, the implications for Africa's economies, governance and civil societies are profound. Today, we will be unpacking these developments with our guest, Tony Onazi Oche, Esquire. He is a lawyer and a doctoral candidate in the Political Science Department at the University of Pretoria. His current research focuses on Africa's perspective and interest in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as AI governance. Hello, Dr. Tony. Thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you very much, Emma. Just for the record, I'm not yet a doctor, but I take that as a prophecy, and I'm hoping that in a few months to come, I'll be officially confirmed with that title. But again, thank you for welcoming me on the show, and it's my pleasure to join.
All right. Thank you for joining. Of course, congratulations are in order ahead of that promotion. All right. So let's talk about the escalation of trade wars. Well, the Trump administration significantly increased tariffs, with Chinese imports facing rates as high as 145%. Well, how have these aggressive trade policies affected global diplomatic relations? Well, I'm asking that in particularly with key partners like China and the EU.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think the word tariff is what the current president of the United States of America, President Trump, regards to as the most beautiful word in the English dictionary. The tariff, which has gone up to about 145%, although the president has promised that it will come down after some negotiation, is actually a reaction to the growth of China and how there's some sort of feeling that China is sort of benefiting from the global order in terms of trade than the United States, and also the fact that the United States has trade deficit. I think that is what has overall provoked the feeling in the United States that there should be tariff on goods coming from China. And President Trump, that was part of his campaign, and that has been part of his message that he wants to bring manufacturing back to the US. But of course, it has really kind of caused some sort of little shift in the global order in terms of trade, as countries such as China is beginning to look for other alternatives. It didn't start today, but however, it is now in all our faces, and it's in the faces of the policymakers in China that there's got to be an alternative market for Chinese goods. And we saw recently how the Chinese president Xi Jinping has been touring Asian countries, which is actually its largest market as a bloc. So yes, it has really disrupted global trade.
Well, let's look at the African Growth and Opportunities Act. Well, we understand that these heightened U.S. tariffs have reportedly nullified benefits for the AGOA. It's leading nations like South Africa to seek alternative markets. Well, what would you say are the potential long-term economic implications for African countries as a result of this shift in U.S. trade policy?
Yes, AGOA, I think countries like South Africa, Lesotho, and some other countries have really benefited from AGOA. And this new shift in trade is really going to impact that benefit. And also, let's bear in mind that AGOA will kind of, lapse, or it will become obsolete. The act will become obsolete in September 2025. So it's actually the time, the time is now for the United States and African countries to begin to have, to renegotiate a new AGOA. But however, with the new posture of the President of the United States, with his new attitude to trade, it is going to significantly affect AGOA, and if possible, maybe it will be discontinued. What that means is that countries like South Africa will have to look for alternative markets, maybe on the continent, because South Africa, silently, Africa has remained South Africa's, national interest, but it has not really been spoken. It has not really been very, it has not been visible in, research papers and all of that. But South Africa, alternatively, we want to kind of, look for alternative, trade, instrument that will support its expansion in Africa, and maybe the Cape Sea route could become very strategic. It want to kind of, look for markets, more markets for its manufactured goods on the continent, just such as car parts and all of that. So yeah, for countries like South Africa, it's going to really affect South Africa and other African countries that have been exporting goods, through the AGOA, benefits. Is going to significantly affect the economy. It will lead to loss of jobs, and also there will be, a scramble for markets, on the continent. And significantly, South Africa is one of the countries that is going to really bear the brunt already. South Africa has some sort of a strain, in its relations with, the Trump administration. So yeah, South Africa and other African countries are really going to be, affected by this new shift in trade policy.
Okay, so let's look at the supply chain as it's been disrupted by these both tariffs. I understand that reports have come up that it has disrupted global supply chains and it's leading to an increase in prices and also potential shortages. Well, how would these disruptions influence global economic stability and the diplomatic standing of the United States as well?
Yeah, I think there's going to be disruption in trade globally, and also in terms of supply chain. There's going to be really big disruption, especially in the US. People who, company and individuals who are into supply chain are actually going to maybe lose some part of their job, because the imports will reduce drastically. It has reduced already, and also we saw the dip in the in the stock market. About 10 trillion US dollars was wiped in 10 days after the tariff. So it's significantly going to affect supply chain. It's also going to affect global trade, because the United States appears to be one of the largest importers in the world, because trades is significantly done in the dollars, and they also have the purchasing power to buy goods from across the world. So indeed, it is going to disrupt supply chain, and it's also going to disrupt trade around the world.
Well, let's go to one of the hot topics of the Trump administration, and that would be the rollback of transgender rights. Well, we understand the Trump administration has issued executive orders rolling back protections for transgender individuals. That also includes banning trans athletes from women's sports and curtailing gender transitions for minors. Well, how will these policies align or conflict with international human rights standards? And what could be the diplomatic repercussions that could arise from these domestic discussions? Having it in mind that the UK has now, the court in the UK has now come up with the decision that there are two recognized genders, which are male and female, and they're putting around policies that would protect strictly protect gender spaces like restrooms and all of that. So how would that affect decisions globally?
Yeah, we need to recognize the US for what it is. It is actually a global leader on many fronts, also on issues of human rights, which it's kind of projects as one of its core values, is going to be significantly impacted around the world, starting from European countries, especially countries that are closely aligned with the United States. But however, I think in some maybe some parts of the world like Africa, it may not really have any significant impact because most of the gender related laws that were passed in Africa were passed in order to, in order to show open disagreement, with, the demands of the United States. So why it will affect, gender policies in some countries that are allies to the United States, on the continents, on the African continent, it's not really going to have any significant impact because most of the laws, most of the gender laws most of the gender laws that were passed to kind of restrict the numbers of genders that we do have were actually passed during President Obama's tenure and some in President Biden's tenure, which are very liberal, if you want to tell me that way. So I don't think it will really have a global impact. But however, some countries that must continue to do trade and must continue to kind of take global position with the United States is going to somehow affect how gender policies are made there.
Well, what would you say would be the global implication of this trend for gender rights advocacy?
Yeah, really. I think the United States is one of the major donor country when it comes to advocacy all around the world. So if the United States is cutting down, the money it is investing in US aid and other advocacy programs, then significantly there wouldn't be much support, for gender advocacy around the world. So in that light, you may say, okay, yeah, it's going to the policies in the United States is actually going to impact how gender advocacy is promoted over the world. But again, when it comes to high level politics, for example legislation and all of that, I think the impact will depend on the geographical location. And for Africa, I think it wouldn't really change much. However, most of the non-governmental organizations and non-profit organizations that kind of, that significantly focus on gender advocacy, it is going to impact them because they will have to look for money, elsewhere, to finance or to fund, gender advocacy programs.
Well, considering the US's historical role in promoting human rights, how might these recent policies affect its soft power and its moral authority on the international stage?
Yes, the recent gender policies in the United States is actually going to affect its global, soft power in a way, especially among the communities and people who, and organizations that really advocate for, the communities that are, affected by the policies in the United States. So in that light, it will affect America's soft power in a way. But currently, I think what is even more topical is the issue of trade. That is, sort of the stronghold or the kind of the foundation of Americans, perspective of the world, which is the liberal order. So, why gender policies, might reduce America's soft power, I think what has significantly affected America's soft power in recent time is this, tariff policy or tariff diplomacy, as you may want to have it.
Okay, so speaking on tariff now, is there a risk that African nations might mirror these trade policies? And also, what factors could deter or contribute to that policy's adoption?
Yeah, I don't really, with the African free trade, continental free trade agreement, I think it will be increasingly challenging for any African country to begin to project, that attitude of, of increasing tariff on goods. I don't really see that becoming a trend on the African continent. But however, there could be questions could be asked, why some countries, actually export more than they import from other African countries when they import similar goods from outside the continent. So those questions, I wouldn't say we should rule them out, but what I know is that ideologically on the continent, I've not really seen any outcry for, for any increment or any tariff increment at the moment, and I don't really kind of foresee that in the nearest future.
Okay, so in response to shifting US policies, countries like South Africa, like you mentioned, are looking to explore new trade partnerships, and that is also going to affect some realignments in trade policies in the African region. Well, how would this realignment affect Africa's geopolitical landscape and also its relations with global powers as well?
Yeah, in terms of Africa, I think one of the biggest markets remains Nigeria, for example.
Okay.
Nigeria is a very big market. South Africa, in a way, we want to continue to maintain good relations with Nigeria and other African countries like Lesotho that import virtually everything from, most things from South Africa. And I think in terms of global relations, South Africa want to kind of maintain its relations with the European Union because that also is one bloc that appears not to be very happy with the tariff diplomacy in the United States. And also it will want to maintain its relations with China and Russia, which happens to be co-members of the BRICS. So I think that is what policymakers and Pretorians will be looking at doing.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Barrister Tony, for coming on the show today. We really appreciate you. But before we go, what would you say is the future of trade and diplomacy in as it concerns the African continent, looking at the changing tides and, of course, how it's going to affect us moving forward?
Yeah, I think the future of African trade remains in the hands of Africans. Africa as a continent has to build more seaports. They have to begin to think that a solution made in Africa is possible, and one of the instruments that needs to be enacted to the later is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which actually we increase the intra-Africa trade, because right now if you look at what is happening in the world, there has been a significant shift from multilateralism to unilateralism. Why that appears to be the trend, African countries, which are smaller economies in comparison to China and the United States, will want to come together to see how they can create a bigger economy in Africa, whereby there will be increased trade and they will reduce the amount of trade capital that leaves the continent in search of goods elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Barrister Tony. We appreciate you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
All right. We have been speaking with Barrister Tony, and of course we are talking about the US trade policies, trade, gender, and everything about the Trump administration as it affects the African continent.